So how long are you staying? Kate Kalutkiewicz.
I know. I just want to put this here. I'm going to the restroom. You're a lot simpler.
My hair is less of a problem over here.
Sorry. Chelsea will help you move the mic when we talk, so don't jump out of your chair, otherwise we'll have to Alright, so when the music's off, you can start.
Yeah.
Or you're introing.
I'll give the cue. No, I'm not introing. Tom's introing.
Oh, it's going right to
Right to Tom. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Hello and welcome to today's program, What to Expect, the 2025 APEC Summit in South Korea and the U.S.-Korea relationship. Thanks for joining us. I'm Tom Byrne, President and CEO of the Korea Society. Next week, Gyeongju, South Korea will be the site of the 2025 Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum. The theme of the summit is Building a Sustainable Tomorrow, Connect, Innovate, and Prosper. Apart from the summit itself, we are also anticipating U.S.-Korea trade talks, a Trump-Xi meeting, and even perhaps a Trump-Kim meeting on the sidelines. We have with us this afternoon two top experts to help us better understand the unfolding developments and the lead up to APEC. It's my pleasure to introduce them. Phil Goldberg served as U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Korea in 2022-2025. He was the ambassador to Colombia as well, and he currently serves on the board of the Korea Society. Kate Kalutkiewicz is Senior Managing Director and leads McLarty Associates trade practice down in Washington, D.C. She was formerly Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for International Trade at the White House National Economic Council during the first Trump administration. So thanks for joining us today. The program has been made possible by the generous support of our individual and corporate members, Columbia University's Weatherhead East Asian Institute, and the Korea Foundation. We are welcoming your questions live. We will provide an opportunity for in-person attendees to ask questions directly. With that, I'll jump right into the conversation. So starting with Ambassador Phil Goldberg, it has been 20 years since Korea last hosted the APEC summit. And back then, one key outcome was the promotion of the Bogor goals. I think that summit was in 1994, 1995, for free and open trade and investment. So with the rise of China and the rise of Trump economics, much has changed since then. What outcomes do you expect this time in terms of economics?
So I think one has to be realistic about an APEC meeting and outcomes. I think much of the attention will take place in the side meetings that are going on between President Trump and Xi Jinping, if that happens, as we expect. If there is some sort of meeting at the demilitarized zone with Kim Jong-un, which is something that's been speculated about, but probably less than 50% chance that will happen. The sidebar issues having to do with the trade and investment and tariffs with South Korea, which has not yet been fully concluded. That's where I think the heavy emphasis will be. But in terms of what you mentioned, Tom, of the past goals, that was a very ambitious goal, right. Open and fair trade. And actually, it started deteriorating before the Trump administration. It's been turned on its head by the Trump administration, by the tariffs and investment ideas that have come forth. But if you think of China's rise, its entry into the WTO, the denigration of the WTO as an organization, you have to be, again, realistic about whatever is stated. Having a sustainable tomorrow is a very nice thing, but it's not necessarily something that people will remember for a long time. But people will remember if there's an agreement or no agreement between the U.S. and China on trade and tariffs. We'll remember if this investment issue is resolved with the Republic of Korea. We'll certainly remember another meeting at Panmunjom with Kim Jong-un if that were to happen.
Right. So Kate, just turning to South Korea, since South Korea is the host of this APEC meeting, what do they hope to accomplish for this year's summit?
Well, I would assume that the primary goal of South Korea is to finalize and essentially move beyond this back and forth on the trade talks. Having President Trump there, I think, is a huge victory for them in any event, because I think, like Phil said, APEC itself is perhaps not the main tent of this circus, if you will. The other shows that are going on alongside of it, I think, really will be most anticipated components of this particular visit. But for South Korea, again, because we have had so much drama related to whether or not the trade talks have been finalized or not, and whether they will move forward, I think that has to be the top goal.
Right. Okay. And again, turning to this, if both Trump from the U.S. and Xi Jinping from China do attend, how do you think that will play out? I mean, is it possible it's essentially a trade war between between the U.S. and China. Can that be resolved or put on a more constructive path in such a short meeting?
Well, possibly, but I think that the context and the environment in which these talks are happening is equally important because, of course, the president's surrogates, the Treasury Secretary, the USTR, they're already in Asia trying to lay the groundwork for several announcements, which are tangentially related to the U.S.-China talks. Of course, they're meeting with their Chinese counterparts to try to lay a framework to a productive engagement between the two leaders, but they're also there ostensibly to finalize agreements with other partners in the region.
Right.
Part of what's happening, I believe, in the U.S.-China talks, this sort of status quo that keeps bumping along, is an outcome of the fact that both sides are struggling to create the necessary leverage over the other to bring the agreement forward. Right. And so for the United States, I think what we've seen is that, amassing supporters around us, around the United States, whether it's Malaysia or Japan or Korea or the Europeans, trying to apply pressure to China, I think is part of this entire agenda. And so I think some of these other discussions leading into the ostensibly the conversation with Xi will be very important.
Yeah. In Trump's approach to China, if I can just follow up on this, is he trying to enlist the support of the allies, or is he more interested in using tariffs to get China to negotiate the way he wants them to negotiate, or outcomes that he wants to see?
Well, I think he always wants to do everything on his own to start. And tariffs, of course, are his favorite source of leverage. But we've seen that those tariffs don't have the same sort of leverage that they did the first time around, right? I mean, as he began his second term, he applied very high tariffs on China and quickly realized domestically that was not going to be the right outcome. Right. It was not necessarily achieving the concessions he had hoped to achieve from the Chinese. And so he's had to resort to other types of leverage. At the same time, however, he has started to push allies, whether through an ask or a demand, right, to start to apply pressure as well, because I think he does recognize that absent coordination with allies, with the G7 in particular, he's going to have a hard time getting that same sort of leverage over the Chinese in these talks. Right.
And turning again to the U.S.-Korea negotiations over the tariffs and investment, Ambassador Goldberg, do you want to make any predictions, or how would you analyze possible outcomes of this?
I'm too confused to have a real outcome on this. It has been going back and forth for several weeks now, several months really, since the original deal was announced. It comes down, I think we can say, to the investments that are being committed, the same that happened with Japan, only somewhat less. Korea's inability to come up with cash on the barrelhead, $350 billion, which would represent over the next few years 6.5% of their GDP, or their foreign currency reserves would be completely depleted. So these issues have entered into the discussions. How they've been received by the administration, by the Trump administration, is still open to question. I'm sure that Secretary Bessent and that up to a certain point, maybe the Commerce Secretary as well, Lutnick, understand these concerns and their ability to do these things. So they are talking about how to structure this over time, how to have somewhat less of a yearly investment scheme. But how it's going to actually come out, I mean, President Trump has said on several occasions he expects $350 billion and wants to make those investments himself along with his administration and decide strategically where it's going to go. I don't think that's going to happen. So clearly they haven't come to an agreement yet. They seem to be, at least in Seoul, talking about coming closer. They've had all kinds of visits, including yesterday and today in Washington, to try to resolve some of these issues beforehand. But I think for anyone to make a prediction at this point is virtually impossible. It's just the whole thing is too confusing.
Yeah. So just to clarify something, I mean, when I first heard of this $350 billion number, the investment component of lower tariffs, kind of the quid pro quo, at first, does this include all the investments that Hyundai and the other Jabil have pledged? It doesn't. This is the U.S.
fresh
would set
investment.
up a sovereign wealth fund, in effect,
Absolutely.
politically controlled by
That was what
executive
was
branch.
Originally being posited by President Trump and by Secretary Lutnick, that this was somehow like a sovereign wealth fund. When in fact, I think that the Europeans also have thought of this as, well, we've got companies, Hyundai has already committed $30-40 billion, and Samsung $30 or $40 billion. Well, there's $100 billion of it almost, and then we'll add on with some shipbuilding investments, Hanwha and others, and that it would be gradual and it would be sort of determined by both parties. But that's not necessarily the thinking that when it started this whole process. And so that, therefore, knowing where it's going to come out is difficult.
Yeah, that's right. So it's not just Korea that has to deal with this issue, but the EU, turning to Kate, the EU, Japan, and others that have reached trade deals. At least I understand there's like a memorandum of understanding in these trade deals. There's no legal document. But how is this actually affecting global trade? And then I'll jump, and then Ambassador Goldberg, I'd like to hear your opinions. What's happening now? Is it reversible, or is it just reinforcing a trend that has been relevant? And I know this is a long question, but to get back to the first part, it seems like some countries are responding kind of organically. I think the UK has a trade agreement with India, right? And maybe that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the Trump tariffs. But anyway, I'll leave it. Go ahead, Kate.
Those were a lot of questions. So I think partly relevant to the question you asked, Phil, too. If we back out and we look at what did the president say when he took the oath of office the second time around, and what did he say on Liberation Day? What is his agenda about? I think it's fair to criticize him because in many ways these tariffs, because he uses them for revenue raising and leverage and reshoring and reducing reliance on China, they are sometimes at conflict with one another. Right. But at the end of the day, on Liberation Day, when he stood in the Rose Garden and said what he was trying to achieve, it was to achieve fairness, right? He kept talking about reciprocity. We have given too much as the American economy, as the U.S. taxpayer, all the rest of it, to the rest of the world, and we've not gotten it in return. So from a very fundamental point of view, that seems to be what is driving him in these discussions. Right. What it means is if he can walk away with some, frankly, very high-level commitments, whether they're investment commitments, whether they are purchases of soybeans or whatever. If he can have a press statement which shows that he has won, right? This is what President Trump cares about, the victory lap. Sometimes the follow-through is perhaps not as critical. And so in each of these agreements, what we've seen so far is less of him addressing these reciprocal trade barriers that he spoke about. We're not trying to change the way regulations impact U.S. businesses, for example, which was something he talked about that day, but rather these very high-level commitments which enable him to show movement. This has been true in the case of Europe and Japan, and I think probably for Korea as well, so long as they're willing to tell the president, like the European Commission President von der Leyen said, we're here to reset the relationship. We're here to rebalance the trade deficit and surplus issue.
Right.
There are different ways, I think, to achieve that, which could be a bit more flexible than the Koreans have I think, gotten themselves into thinking. And so I think this is his primary motivator. Whether or not it actually fundamentally changes any of these harms he's been trying to undo is the long-term question. But I do think it is with a goal in mind of fundamentally changing the U.S. approach to global trade and tariffs, without a doubt. And we can talk about whether that's reversible. I personally think this is a trend that has been building in the United States since he ran for president the first time, was exacerbated by COVID, frankly, when Americans realized we didn't have access to things we needed. And you know, the popular opinion in the United States, it's hard to hear, but it is pretty pro-tariff. It is pretty pro this Trump agenda, which is shocking as a former trade negotiator, that we have come to this point. But it is fundamentally different, and I fear is not going to change.
Can I
Yes,
say one
please.
word about China and its approach and what could happen at this meeting? The fact is that China is the only country with both the economic power and the political will to really push back hard on all of these issues. You put tariffs on, we'll do something on rare earth minerals. You do this, we'll do that, and have the ability to do it and to sustain it. You want to reshore, we will move our businesses offshore. And so there's a response and an ability to do it. And so they're in a different position than just about all of the other countries that are dealing and multilateral groupings like the EU to deal with the Trump administration's tariff agenda. That doesn't mean that they're going towards open and free trade, although that's what they say they would be doing. But it's a different approach.
Yeah. And what about years ago we used to hear about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and then now it's called the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific, the CPTPP, and then China's RCEP. Have they been given new life by Trump's tariff policies?
Potentially. I mean, I think at the end of the day, yes. I think this probably has incentivized, the UK to wrap up with India, or the EU after, 30 years of negotiating with Mercosur, maybe, but I still am somewhat skeptical. I think at the end of the day, the US consumer market remains an incredibly powerful driver. And, we in the United States and in the trade negotiating sphere, right, we have always used the power of our market to coerce, in a way, changes in other economies. We did it for a long time by lowering tariffs, creating access to our market. But in return, our trading partners had to change their laws on IP or labor and environment. This is really a flip of that, right? Now, if you want access to our market, you have to pay a price for it. But I think that the attractiveness of the United States is not going to change, whether or not you're striking new trade agreements. That the interesting point, right? China may be able to walk away, but this is what keeps these leaders at the table with Donald Trump, even when he uses language that is not particularly diplomatic or speaks about some of this. That prize of the United States economy will withstand, I think, the challenges that President Trump is creating for the global environment.
Right. If I could make an editorial point here. So the U.S. has been open to trade and investment, but it's also an open capital market. So investors can put their money in, but they also can get it out.
That's right.
Without any hindrance. And that is a big distinction between the U.S. and China. If I might,
if there is another very important component here to the president's economic agenda, and it's very inwardly focused. Of course, are the formalization of the tax benefits for corporations. We have one of the best tax environment for investors, for corporate investments. His focus on deregulation, which in stark contrast, of course, to Europe, shows how open the United States is for these types of investments. I myself have spoken quite a lot to this new so-called investment accelerator, which led by Wall Street folks under the Commerce Department as they say, creating a white glove service for investors. And so it's a very attractive place, again, with the tax environment, the deregulation environment, and the access to consumers that speak the same language and follow the same regulatory structure. It's very attractive. And this is why President Trump likes to highlight these commitments, right? We have billions and billions of commitments in new investments. I don't know how many trillions. I don't know how many have broken ground yet, but it almost doesn't matter. He just wants to say that it's happening.
Well, the Hyundai Meta plant in Georgia has broken ground, as we all know.
Hyundai actually is an interesting point, because despite the ICE raid on their facility with LG, and despite some of the demands for further or reduction in IRA benefits for electric vehicles, Hyundai is so committed to this market and so in need of this market that they are willing to look past all those things because they need to continue to try to have a U.S. base. And they've been forced out of the China market. They're going to be competing with these cheap and somewhat attractive Chinese electric vehicles, and so they want to be here. So it's an interesting case in how a company like that needs to have the American market.
Right. Yeah, the U.S., as Kate was saying, is still like the most appealing, the largest market out there in the world. Turning back to the institutional importance of APEC, how do you, as a diplomat, how do you put this into the whole panoply of international institutions? Where does APEC sit? How would you classify it?
Like many of these international institutions, it's a great thing for diplomats. We spend a lot of time planning it, and we spend a lot of times. I was ambassador in Seoul, went down to Gyeongju to talk about where we're going to put the president if he comes, and all kinds of logistical and substantive issues. What will be the agenda, and all kinds of meetings, and then ministerials. But when it comes right down to it, what people will look at, as I said at the beginning, is sort of what happens at the UN during the leader 2-week speeches, and all of the leaders who come to New York. They have meetings, they have press conferences, they interact with each other. And the same is going to be true at APEC. That's what's going to happen. President Trump apparently is not staying for the Leaders Forum, but he will have those sidebar meetings and the probably bilateral meeting with President Lee Jae-myung. So that's what's really going to happen. And then you have the business groups that come, which is very important also because they're looking at their customer base of countries, and they're looking at dealing with each other, but also their investments and where they're going. So when you have the chairman of NVIDIA or OpenAI there, that's why they want to go. It's a good environment to discuss these things, and that's really a great forum. Because of the dynamism of the Asian economies, the Asia Pacific economies. That
really caught my eye, that you have these chairmen of these cutting edge high tech companies going to Gyeongju. I was a bit surprised by that. Kate, do you want to? I mean, what do they hope to get out of this?
Well, they're going with the negotiator in chief. I mean, they're hoping to get deals out of it. You know, they're there to benefit from his desire to have a splashy press release, but also, I mean, this is a hugely important market for growth. So
get deals and investing in APEC countries.
Could be, yeah. Well, that's what we've seen with the president's travels so far. You know, in the Middle East, in the UK, he is often accompanied by this large contingent of CEOs, very much tech focused. We see really. Energy, obviously, another key area. Now, the one sector we've not seen a lot of that he's gotten a lot of pressure on is agriculture. And I will say he's probably going to look for some wins on agriculture, even if CEOs of major companies are not there, because domestically the pressure is growing on him to focus on something other than strategic manufacturing and technology. And the ag piece of this has been missing by and large. And so I think that will probably be another priority for him as he seeks some of these arrangements.
So this would be
especially
opening foreign
in his
markets.
meeting with Xi Jinping to get the soybean market and other things moving again.
That's right.
Right. Okay. Well, why don't I turn over to the audience turn over to audience questions. So if anyone has a question, please identify yourself and please make it a question and not a polemic.
Okay, so we'll do questions from the podium, so you come walk.
Oh, you go up to the podium. Okay.
Thank you very much for this very interesting exchange. I've learned a few things. I'm a syndicated journalist. My name is Manik Mehta. My first question relates to the expansion of APEC. There has been talk in certain circles in Asia that APEC should be expanded with the inclusion of countries like India and others. How do you see the chances of such a thing happening? And secondly, APEC is often being compared, or rather contrasted, with BRICS. Do you see any relevance in that comparison? There has been talk of dismantling BRICS in Mr. Trump's circles. Is that a practical solution? Thank you.
Well, I'll say on BRICS that there have been certain efforts to change the, for example, the currency that BRICS would use, or the international currency, to replace the dollar. I don't think it's taken hold. It's, to a certain extent, a political group as well to take on the U.S. and the West. I don't think the BRICS is, look, several of the BRICS countries are already in APEC, China being the most obvious country as an example. So APEC is a forum that, as I say, is to me analogous to the UN and its ability to bring leaders together. And, you know, some of the themes that will be discussed, a sustainable tomorrow, for example, are worthwhile and are things that we need to look at, the future of AI or the future of the digital economy, how aging societies, of which APEC has many, how they deal with health and the economy and providing employment for young people. All of that's worthwhile. But the BRICS has taken on a kind of political flavor that isn't necessarily the case because APEC is too diverse for it. As for India, I don't know about its potential membership.
I mean, it's an interesting question, but I think by the way, I agree completely about the value of APEC or not. It's a convening organization at this point, as much as one that can advance any sort of policy, if it ever could. And so I think this expansion question or the role of the BRICS, I mean, in many ways, what we see is it's a bit as a sign to President Trump that there are groups out there that can get together and bully you, perhaps. And I find it to be very performative in nature and not really that impactful. The BRICS situation, or the big confab with the Russians and the Indians and the Chinese, attracted quite a lot of media attention. But at the end of the day, I think these leaders in these economies still have very much their own interests in mind. And so for me, I'm somewhat skeptical about the potential for groupings like that to mount a successful counteroffensive to President Trump, if that indeed is the outcome. If as you pointed out, the U.S. trade policy is perhaps creating new alliances that might be beneficial to other economies, and maybe that's in their interest. But, I'm not sure that the groupings themselves matter as much as some of these more bilateral discussions that are happening in the background.
We've only talked about APEC, obviously, because that's why we're here. But the president is stopping in Malaysia for an ASEAN meeting as well. which is a hugely important trading and investment area for the United States also. So watch that space and what comes out of those meetings even before he gets to Korea.
Do we have another question from the audience? The gentleman in the back? I'll get, maybe someone will ask it. Okay.
Oh, someone's coming here.
Sure, Frank. So Frank first, then.
Oh, hi, Frank.
Hey, hi. Frank Uciardo from TRT World. I'm the UN correspondent there. Two questions. One for Ms. I pronounce it Kalutkiewicz?
You can do it. Yeah.
Close.
Great.
And one for Ambassador Goldberg.
Easy.
When you mentioned in your remarks before that in this country the popular opinion is pro-tariffs, did you believe that was true during the initial rollouts when we were all down on Wall Street watching everything tank?
Well, I mean, as somebody who lives in D.C., but is from the center of the country, I grew up in the center of the country, which is a very red part of the country. I myself was shocked during the campaign, frankly, when the polling was showing that the majority of voters supported the imposition of tariffs, the 10% ring around the collar and the 60% tariffs on China. I mean, it was shocking to me, but it was reflective, I think, of, as I said, of some of these trends that we've seen start to grow. I think what has been interesting, you're right, Wall Street tanked, and then it was fine, right? And I think partly due in part because of these other accompanying agenda items that he's doing to shore up the domestic economy. What has been interesting so far is that largely the tariffs that have been put in place have not really affected consumer-facing products. We can go 5 years without buying a car. We can even go several years without buying a refrigerator. I mean, these things are going to become more expensive. What the president did early on, and I'm not sure it's because he wanted to or because he was convinced to, was to exempt from the tariffs USMCA qualifying goods. These are goods that come from Canada and Mexico. And had he imposed tariffs, we would have seen significantly higher costs at the grocery stores. That's happening irrespective of the tariffs, of course, but that action, I think, would have really impacted public opinion and energy goods from Canada. So I do think they are trying to be thoughtful about some of the nuance necessary. We see them now talking about no tariffs on coffee, right? We don't have coffee in the U.S. They are moving, I think, toward a more flexible approach that will shield them from some of the consumer actions. But even when he threatened 100% tariffs on China, by and large, no one blinked because we have moved away, companies have moved away from China fairly dramatically, such that I think it's going to take a lot more than tariff threats to move the market significantly. And also, he's not running for re-election, despite how he trolls the Democrats. He's not running for re-election. This enables him to move a little bit more aggressively without fear of market repercussions, at least in the short term.
Ambassador, I believe it was back in 2023, following that APEC conference, there was an uptick in military activity by China. Do you think that might be a possibility this time around?
I imagine it will. The possible meeting or the likely meeting between Xi Jinping and President Trump will have a bearing on that. What I did notice is that the DPRK, North Korea, has, for the first time, I think, since Lee Jae-myung has been president, set off some ballistic missiles into the East Sea. So you might see an increase there. But I don't see China. I think the main point from their meeting will be on these trade issues. Just following up on something that Kate was saying about the Trump agenda and its popularity. I think what has happened, tariffs aside, is that this idea that he has planted in the body politic in the United States, that somehow we're the victims of international trade and free trade, is definitely taken hold. And whether it's through tariffs or whatever other measures are taken to try to deal with it, that this is somehow that we've been victims of international trade. And of course, that's a very debatable issue.
You put your finger on it there. I was on the campaign trail with him in Pennsylvania, and that's exactly what people were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks, Frank. Do we have another question? Go.
My name's Barry. I'm just here from scholarly interest, really. My question for the panel is, well, as introduction, we've already seen Brazil benefit a lot from the U.S.-China trade problem. Soybeans and coffee both have dramatically increased going to China from Brazil. If we were to look at this U.S.-China problem in isolation, since we don't know what else is going to happen in the world, and obviously a lot's going to happen, but just in isolation, what countries serve to benefit most if the trade war, if you will, continues as it is without meaningful change? And specifically Korea, does Korea serve, is it in Korea's interest, or will they benefit if the trade problems with China continue?
It's a great question. I think you're exactly right. The big agricultural powerhouses stand to benefit tremendously because China needs to buy agriculture, and it has refused to buy U.S. agriculture, and so it finds other sources in the hemisphere. And so both Brazil and Argentina have been huge beneficiaries. It's a more mixed picture when you're talking about the developed economies, because I think, as we saw last week, they're getting caught in the war. Right? And they're going to be forced to choose sides, I think, whether it's because they're getting pressure from the United States, expanding the reach of its entity lists and these export controls, which we saw come home very close in the Netherlands last week around a company which was a subsidiary of a Chinese firm, and then China weighing in and shutting down exports from China of that product. The rare earths controls, of course, the same. They are implicating these, if you will, innocent bystanders, but I think forcing a choice, that's going to become very difficult for even a country like Korea. So I'm not sure there are evident winners and losers. I think there's probably more losers than winners when it comes to the trade war between the United States, particularly as it comes to anyone in the tech space that's on the developed side of the ledger.
On Korea, 22% of their exports are related to semiconductors. They also are huge manufacturing leaders in the kinds of durable products that Kate mentioned, refrigerators, televisions. I often said the only question when you turned on a TV in a hotel room is whether you're going to get LG or Samsung. They're a powerhouse. So they are really, in those kinds of, those areas, a superpower, if you will. And those are the areas that are of most interest to them and concerns, and automobile manufacturing too, and parts. So those are the areas, unlike some of the others, and they can, they're kind of squeezed in a way on especially semiconductors. They have investments in China. They want to continue some of them. NVIDIA is now selling some of its products in China after an agreement that was reached by Jensen Huang of NVIDIA and President Trump. But those are the areas where South Korea's interests will be very much involved.
That's interesting. Well, do you think that being in this squeeze, can America put export controls on Korea to stop?
We already have in terms of semiconductors and some of the strategic goods and products. We already have some export controls. And yes, Korea has had to adapt. And again, it's a question of the U.S. market versus some of the other considerations with China that they have to take into account in formulating their policy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question from the floor, and then another one. So we'll
Thank you very much for all of you. My name is Itai. I teach at Gyeongju College. Two-part question. First, about Taiwan and semiconductors. Is there any impact of that trade on when is going to be discussed APEC? Second, seeing the Trump renamed NAFTA USMCA, is there any chance of Trump wanting to do the TPP on his terms?
No, I don't think he does. The difference between USMCA and TPP, I would say, is, NAFTA, God, I don't know, 20 years, 15 years. I mean, the North American relationship is central to U.S. economic competitiveness, and whether or not the president dreams of a day when he can, rip up that agreement and do everything in the United States, I think he does recognize that is not the case. We are economically entwined in a way that you just really can't discount the importance of it. And there is a lot of attention on USMCA. The president will threaten to leave USMCA until he's out of office, and he'll probably still badmouth it. I mean, this is a source of leverage, but at the end of the day, his actions show that he understands we have to maintain that relationship. TPP, of course, was never really finished. TPP was not going to pass Congress when it was sent to Congress for a number of reasons. So it was already a little bit, not ready for prime time. Of course, it was an issue in the election. The Democrats, even at the time, the nominee for President Hillary Clinton opposed it. So there were a lot of issues. The president also has been very, very clear that, he really prefers bilateral negotiations. And something like TPP is so far afield, I think, from something he'd consider. This is why we see him engaging with Japan, with Korea, with Malaysia, with Vietnam. I mean, I think he really does believe that those sorts of bilateral agreements are much more important and frankly better to achieve U.S. objectives. So that's probably how he would look at that.
One of the ironies of USMCA is that a large percentage of it is NAFTA. Some of it is actually TPP, some of the good practices that were extracted from TPP. And then a certain percentage that was included to satisfy President Trump's sort of interests in how you deal with Canada and Mexico. But there is some TPP in USMCA.
It's fair. As trade negotiators, you always look at the last agreement and then borrow what you can and then make it a little bit better incrementally. So I think that's a fair point.
I wasn't a trade negotiator.
Okay. And our final question from the floor.
Hi, thank you. My name is Jessica Bissett. I'm with the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations. I have two quick questions. The first one I know is unfair. How long do you think, if it's Trump Xi meeting takes place, if some sort of deal happens, do you think that will fundamentally change the dynamic right now between the two countries in terms of its trade relationship? Is this a short-term piece? If there is a short-term piece, how long do you think that might last? And then relatedly, we've been talking a lot about leverage this afternoon. If you think about our two main, the U.S. and China, their leverage points in terms of export controls. For us, it's advanced semiconductors. For China, it's rare earths. I think it's fair to say that it's much more likely that China could catch up pretty closely to the highest end chip we have in maybe the next 3 or 5 years, depending on if they're combining chips, stacking them, whatever. And it's going to take us a lot longer to develop our own in-house supply of rare earths. So looking forward, where do you think the U.S. could look for other leverage points? Thanks.
Yeah, I think one significant difference this time around from the first time is that the president really lacks a clear articulation or maybe even an understanding of the goal. Like if he has two goals, I think we can say he has two goals. He does want a deal with China. He wants that legacy. That's clear. And for him, China, like we were talking, the Chinese market is very valuable, right? He does want U.S. companies to sell and make profits and do well in China. On the other hand, he really wants to stop them from advancing technologically. I always think of it as him trying to grab the shirt and pull it back, right? We will try to protect technology, but then make it okay for NVIDIA to sell chips. It's obviously a bit convoluted what he's trying to achieve here, but I think it does also go back to this leverage question. So I think, no, there's not going to be a long-term outcome. if they meet, it will, to me, I mean, I think the best case scenario at this point would be a return to the status quo, which is the circle and loop we find ourselves in. Status quo, we both introduce something brand new out of the blue, we negotiate that away and end up at the status quo again. I think for that to change, at least from a US perspective, for that to change, we have to stop and address the chokehold on rare earths. And that is something that the president is trying to do. You saw a very big agreement with the Australians this week. That is very much to address this. And unlike a lot of the other critical minerals that we have no access to, we can make rare earths. We did make rare earths, right? So we can funnel a lot of money into this problem, but until we solve it, and I'm no expert in how long it takes to set this up or any of that, but I think we will have to solve that at least to some degree before we see the dynamic change in the bilateral relationship.
It seems to me that there are a couple of things that animate President Trump. One is the deal and money. The other is Donald Trump. And he wants to have a visit. He keeps talking about it to Beijing, a state visit early next year. So he wants this deal for the reasons that Kate mentioned, but also for that ability to move forward with us. What's really interesting to me is that there are real China hawks in this administration, and he doesn't seem to be one of them. He's animated by these trade deals and by rare earth and issues related to those trade and investment issues. But I've never heard him talk about the South China Sea. He doesn't really talk about Taiwan very much unless pressed. Some of the military and strategic issues, which have much to do with Korea, the sort of redirection of our forces in USFK towards the Indo-Pacific rather than north towards North Korea. These don't seem to animate him as much, or at all, at least as far as I can tell. And so in this administration of many China hawks, he's sort of missing. So if they have an agreement, it will maybe be tenuous, maybe it won't last, there'll be other disagreements, but it will certainly last into next year when he wants that visit to Beijing.
Good.
But I would just,
go ahead,
sorry,
Kate. Yeah.
I mean, I think it is important. He does want a deal. I mean, we saw when China imposed the latest controls, he fired off a very fiery Truth Social post and then walked it back. But I think China can push him too far, and he will respond. So I think as much as he wants a deal, we can see sort of what's happened with the Russians and his realization that what he wanted was not going to happen in the way he wanted, and he had to change approach. So I do think it's important at a point. I mean, there's only so much of this I think he'll be willing to take.
Right. Okay, we have one more question. It's the wild card question. It comes from Mark Mangier of South China Morning Post correspondent. Kim Jong-un, will there be a summit between Xi? Will this disrupt all the dynamics that we just talked about? Xi Jinping and Trump and Lee Jae-myung and Trump.
I'm going to let the diplomat take that one.
I think it's a real if it's going to happen, and so we don't know. But it will suck up a lot of the political and diplomatic air in the atmosphere. Yeah, but I don't think it will have a bearing on the outcome with China. China, of course, has its own views on North Korea. It has now begun to match a little bit Russia's view that they're not worried about denuclearization. They've all moved back from that. Russia's virtually acknowledged, and not just acknowledged, but has said it's okay for North Korea to have nuclear weapons. I mean, that's sort of their position at the moment. China's not there. But they have this economic relationship, and I think Xi Jinping made clear that they are the dominant power when it comes to North Korea's economy, even though Russia is shoring it up and giving them new technology, especially in the military sphere. It's a long way of saying I don't think that the Xi Jinping will allow China's interests with the United States to be diverted by some what is, with a possible meeting with Kim Jong-un, the old expression, nothing ventured, nothing gained. In this case, it's nothing ventured and nothing lost. I don't know what they would even talk about, quite frankly. North Korea has, and Kim Jong-un have rejected denuclearization. They are in the process of building that nuclear capability, both the missile and the fissile material for nuclear weapons. They have this relationship with Russia, which has bailed them out in many ways internationally. So I don't know exactly what, other than the fact that it happens, would move anything.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Kate, for giving us these fresh insights to the dynamics behind this APEC meeting.
Good.